So welcome, Sue. Thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. So can you take us back? I want to start really at the kind of forefront of your journey. What brought you to that suicide attempt all those years ago? And just to be clear, Sue celebrates 36 years in recovery this year, correct?
This month.
March. Congratulations. That's a big celebration. Bring us back. What led you to that moment?
So it's kind of emotional this time of the month to do it, because if I look back on my journey, like I could tell you everything that led up to that last day that I drank. So like March 3rd, yesterday, technically was 36 years since the day that I've done my last drug. So I put the drug down first, tried to do it without anything. But when you know that lifestyle of going to the bar every single night, so for 11 days I went to the bar every single night, like drinking virgin Bloody Marys, which I never drank Bloody Marys when I was drinking, but it's like that being at the bar and doing
It's a habit, social habit.
Yeah, and being a part of it, because that's all I knew. And it came down to the bar that I was going to all the time. Like, I thought everybody there was my friend. It got to the point where I was almost ready to stick a needle in my arm. And for me, I knew that was not it. So I was in the parking lot, like, contemplating that night and screaming and yelling at myself all the way as I'm driving home, and I made that phone call. Actually, I slit my wrist before I made that phone call. But I was, like, so dramatic. It was like, let me smear the blood all over the wall, and I'll call for help. Yeah. And and when I look back on it, because actually my first suicide attempt was probably at like age 13, when we had moved out of my grandparents' house into our first apartment with my mother. Wow. She was a single mom and just never feeling like I fit in. So, mom was a nurse. She had all kinds of pills. If you had a headache, you take the blue pill. If you got cramps, you take the red pill. So I just took a handful of pills out of there, had them in a sock, and I don't know.
And we talk about that all the time at CFC. That's a really great point, because a lot of young children or adolescents, right, issue that we have with them is that immediate medication. So like the kid is hyper and they're given ADD by their parents or the school nurse. They're, a lot of times immediately it's like, okay, a pill can fix that. And a lot of people that come through our program, it started that young from that response, versus what are some other healing techniques that we can try with our kids to calm them down, or, so that's a really young for that level of intensity and, mental health.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, they say that it's hereditary, that it runs in the family, and I didn't really know my father growing up. My father left when Vietnam started, and there's a whole story behind that too, with Vietnam and my uncle dying and the whole family, and, growing up just knowing that piece of the story. But then when I got sober, I was 23 years old. I turned 24 in rehab. That's when I met my father, because my father went to law school and they did the background check. So we got some information about him, and, I got to go to Florida. I got to meet him, got to know a little bit more about him. And, through the years, finding out how much of the mental health was on that side of the family, and it's funny for having like 4 kids. So you have my father, my 2 aunts, and the brother who passed away in Nam. If you asked all 4 of those children about their mother, they would have a different opinion. Mm-hmm. So like the one that lived the longest with her, the youngest aunt, she'll say, my mother was an alcoholic. If you talk to my father, he would say she was just an angry person. If you talk to my other aunt, she would say, well, she's a manic depressive, she's right, bipolar. And that's why she was that way. So having all those different aspects, and
that's, I think, just miseducated, right? Because especially in that time, there was not a lot of advocacy for mental health and things like that, and healing and obviously she did suffer. So
right,
that was your dad's experience, and then carried on. Right. And I think too, talking about you started at 13, that was your first suicide attempt. Mm-hmm. That carried on, those thoughts carried on till 23 when you first entered rehab, and that was your kind of the end of that heavy usage addiction journey.
Right. I don't discount that for anybody, you know, with suicide attempts, but it's kind of like you said, that cry for help.
Right.
And that's to me what it was. It's like I didn't know how to say, hey, I think I got a problem with drugs. I'm feeling real uncomfortable. Like, I need to do something about it. Can you help me? Instead of, it was like, it always had to be like that dramatic. Like,
Right.
you know, I'll show you, I'll hurt me.
Right. Right. Yeah. And I mean, for you, and we'll talk about this in a minute, your mental health issues, you didn't become necessarily super aware of them until much, much later in your life, your adult life. So, you know, obviously struggled with addiction. Let's talk a little bit. You're a single mom. That was your childhood. Also a member of the LGBTQ community. Do you think that influenced a lot of your adolescent, you know, trying to find your way where you fit?
Well, I never thought that I was. That was a late journey with the LGBT. It was when I was 40 years old.
Okay.
When I came out. So even like growing up, I didn't think that I struggled with that. You know, I just wanted that normal life.
Right.
You know, I'll have a husband, I'll have a baby, you
That'll
know,
fix it all.
yeah. And I just didn't see anything in it.
Well, you
Like,
discovered you as you
Right.
went through life, and that's, you know,
Right. And they talk about the journey of recovery as like peeling that onion, you know, and just peeling layers and layers off, and you know, and the self-discovery and finding more and more about self. So, and just not letting it affect you, you know, because I could say I was 40 years old when I came out. I was 16 years sober, you know, and all this denial came back in. Like, you know, nobody waited until they were this age. Nobody was this sober, you know, nobody was this, you know, that terminal uniqueness that came back in, you know, and my experience always has been whenever I get to that point with that terminal uniqueness, something just happens in my life and I meet somebody and it's like, okay.
Yeah, this is happening for a reason, right?
Right. You're not the only one, you know.
So found sobriety at 24. Where was your journey from there in life? Where did that take you?
So at 24, I ended up in a halfway house. So I was separated from my daughter for 6 months. That journey was, as I always say, if you told me to sit, I stood. If you told me to stand, I sat. Because I couldn't understand what following any of those directions and doing something different had to do with me not picking up a drink or a drug. It's like, hey, I just got a problem with drugs. At first, I only thought it was a problem with drugs. The longer I stayed sober, the more I realized how much alcohol was a big part of it and how it was there.
It was there, yeah.
Yeah.
So you found recovery, and then can you talk us, you know, and at the time you had your daughter, she was younger, and today you're a grandmother of 2, which is incredible. So, you know, talk to us a little bit about when you hit 40 and those mental health issues really resurfaced, because you had a good, let's say, 16 years of recovery, practicing sobriety and living through that, working, all that stuff. So what happened at 40? How does that transpire?
So actually prior to that, there was 2 other mental health concerns. So at 3 years sober, I was so depressed, I was on the couch for like 3 days. I just, as I say, when I finally rolled off the couch, picked up the phone and called my sponsor, she was like, okay, you're not working. This is what you're doing. You're going into this 5-day program. So it was an ACOA, Children of Alcoholics program, 5-day intensive. So it was like going back into rehab. Same thing happened at like 8 years. I went through another depression stage, you know, and all the time I was going into therapy and all these therapists would say, well, maybe you suffer from depression, just maybe a low-lying depression. I was like, no, like, I'm not crazy. I'm not like those people. Like, you know, I came through a psych ward, you know, and I'm 23 years old and I see this 21-year-old kid that comes in who's running down the hallway screaming and stripping his clothes off, and they throw him into a padded room.
Right.
Like, that's my idea of crazy. That's my idea of something, you know. So, like, we're not going to take medication. We're not going to do anything.
Yeah. That denial or stereotype around the varying degrees of mental health.
Right.
Yeah.
So at 10 years of sobriety, I'd started working in a rehab. And I'm working in detox, and people that are coming in, you know, they're getting off of drugs, but they're also dealing with their mental health problems, and they're just, you know, taking Prozac for depression. And I was like, oh, okay, well, maybe we'll take a look at this now. And that was the first time that I started taking the medication. And then I would do times, you know, like 3 to 4 years later, I don't want to take medication anymore. Mm-hmm. And I could see myself spiraling down, you know, and, you know, at 40 years old, I was in a relationship for 5 years. I stayed the last year because he had a DUI and didn't have any transportation. So I'm a good caretaker.
Yes.
So I stayed that last year to take care of him. But in the meantime, I had met somebody in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous, and the friendship started, and I started questioning myself. Like, there's feelings here. There's something wrong with this. So I searched out a therapist that I had 16 years prior to that when I was in the halfway house. She had gone into her own practice, so I had even saw her for a women's group years later. So she was somebody that I trusted.
Right.
So I went back to see Kathy, and I was like, and she just kept saying, don't act out, and there was a point, even when I was in the halfway house, I had 2 roommates who were in a relationship. So it's like, I was kind of triangled in that,
Right.
and something happened. My therapist wasn't there that day, and I freaked out, and the other therapist said, well, maybe you are gay. And I was like, F you. I will be drinking and drugging before that would ever happen, So that's all the stigmatism around that, too.
Right.
So we kind of like swept that.
And I think it's an incredible perspective, because in that time, this is now 40 years ago almost, everything you were dealing with was so hush-hush, don't talk about it. You can't be gay, you can't be, you can't be depressed. Like, it was so different than it is today, although we still deal with a lot of that.
Absolutely.
It's definitely come a long way. So I think hearing that perspective and like what you went through and why, as your journey continued, you did more self-exploration, working in the field, understanding that, okay, like I can have depression. Maybe I should see somebody for this. Maybe I am gay. Like, starting to like discover yourself as more time went on.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So that's how your journey in the LGBTQ community started.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And my daughter went to college. So, they say the joke is, what does a lesbian take on their second date? A U-Haul truck. So I did it a little bit different. I got her a job where I worked at and then moved her in.
Okay. Took your time.
Yeah. Took the time. But I mean, we were friends for like 6 months. So before anything like ever transpired, but then the breakup was that quick, and she moved out and portrayed that I was like this crazy person, which I'll admit that there was feelings that came up in that time that I had never had with men, the jealousy and the definitely different feelings. So
this was all a lot at once, though. A lot of like the self-discovery, like, oh my gosh, I actually do really enjoy this. And that's really when you started to recognize, you looked inside, you're like, okay, I got to do some reflection.
Right.
And, today, I'm just going to bring it to modern day. You're a huge leader in your community. You're incredibly involved. You've been with us as a role model and facilitator over time since 5 years ago, I think you joined us?
2019.
2019.
Yeah.
And in that journey as well, I'm going to mention you also had a personalized weight loss journey, and you lost, over 100 pounds?
114 pounds.
114 pounds, yeah. So you're just kind of constantly rediscovering and reinventing Sue every couple of years.
Right? Yeah. It's like, those things happen, and it's like those feelings are all there. Like I always say that. I'll show you, I'll hurt me.
Yeah.
I'll do this to me, instead of like, but then it's like, okay, that incident happens, whatever it is, and then we start to take a look at ourselves, because it always comes back to self.
Of course. Always.
I could point the finger and say it was my father, it was my mother, it was this, it was that, but it's self, and it's all the behaviors. So it's like, okay, now we're at this point. What behavior do we need to change now? What do we need to work on? All of that underlying stuff that's there.
Yeah. What advice would you give somebody who's struggling, maybe trying to find their sexual identity as a younger adolescent or an older individual that's questioning that?
Right. Just be gentle with yourself, and, just kind of don't deny yourself that pleasure. My thing always was, I cared more about what other people thought about me. So, and I think in society, the way it is, that the people that are coming up, in this day and age, don't care what other people have to say. But, then there is always that person. But it's like, yeah, don't care about whatever, because the whole journey is self. It's the self-discovery. It's you. Take care of you. Be good to you.
Always first.
Yeah,
You first.
always first.
So at 40, through this journey, through the self-discovery later in life, you recognize and were diagnosed with manic depressive disorder.
Depressive, yeah.
Depressive disorder. So how, in your day-to-day life now, what are some tools that you use, and what was your support system like to kind of help you find, recovering that mental health or maintenance, and, how to live with that?
Right. So first and foremost is taking medication. Because I can see I've tried that. I'll always tell anybody, don't do what I do. You don't have to go through that journey of stop taking it and see that you actually need it. So number one is taking medication. Number two is just being kind to myself. And number three is pretty much staying in today. Like, how important is it? What do I have control over today? I always say that circle in the sand. Like, if you draw a circle around yourself in the sand, everything that's inside of that circle is all of your business. Everything outside of that circle is none of your business.
You can't control it.
Right.
Yeah.
So like I said, it all comes back to self and just that self-discovery and that journey. And
did you have a good support system at that time?
I did. I was well grounded into Alcoholics Anonymous when everything went down. I had a good support system. A lot of friends in recovery that were there to kind of like just lift me up and engulf me. And that's been my experience for anything that's happened in my life. It's like, okay, this situation's happened. People have just stepped in, engulfed me, and carried me through to get through those situations.
That's community is so important in that sense. And kind of what brought you to our farm? Is it where you're just trying to look for something a little different back in the day, like 5 years ago? What brought you to HealingUS?
So what brought me to HealingUS was I had moved to this area. I'm originally from the Philadelphia area. And I went to a meeting out in Colts Neck, I believe it was, on a Friday night, and ran into a woman that I knew from Philadelphia that was in the area. And she had told me about her granddaughter who had gone through CFC, and she had just started working at Relevance, because I believe Relevance had just opened up. And me being a smart ass said, "Oh, you got a job for me?" And it was kind of like on a handshake. It was like, "Yeah, come on, you got to come meet Dan," and it was the day before Rock the Farm.
Okay.
And I'm so sad that I did not listen to her that day and show up the next day in Seaside and experience Rock the Farm.
You did, though. You come every year, and it's the best day of the year.
It is. It's awesome. It's awesome. I told one of the members a week or two ago, I was talking to her, and I said something about Rock the Farm. She goes, "What's Rock the Farm?" And I was like, "You've only been here for a week. Like, sit down, put on your seatbelt. Like, it's awesome.
It's a
like,
great
you have to experience."
And that's June 1st, I think, this year. Don't quote me, rockthefarmnj.com. But it is our biggest fundraiser, keeps our doors open. So just such a great time always. Yeah. So you came, but you started as a facilitator, I think, like group leader, if I remember correctly.
No, I started at Relevance
as a
behavioral tech. Yeah.
Oh, that's awesome. So, during your recovery journey, when you first got sober, how old was your daughter?
My daughter was 2.5.
2.5. Okay.
Yeah.
So she was young.
She was young.
You had a lot of time to make up for that. It's, the sense. How has your daughter really, navigated a mom in recovery? Do you talk about it openly? What is her role in your journey?
Oh, absolutely. Her role, as a child, she went to meetings. All of my friends were all in recovery. So a lot of her friends that she grew up with were children of my friends that were in recovery. No, she was always big supportive of it. But it's kind of funny, like my journey is my journey, and I could tell you my story, and I could tell you the way that I saw my bringing up my daughter and doing what I had to do as a single mother and staying sober and, trying to better myself, And then my daughter could tell you her story, Like my daughter will say, "Yeah, well, my mom got sober when I was 3 or whatever, but didn't decide to be my mother until I was 13, which that's her perception.
Right.
That's her reality, And that's because that's when things started happening in her life. you know, that she needed to address and needed to deal with. So, I mean, I've always tried to be there for her, be her best cheerleader. She went to college and she became my best cheerleader because that's when I came out, and she kind of started her own little P-flag thing going on in college. So she's always been my biggest advocate as far as that's concerned.
Amazing. That's awesome. And I think that that's also really important. We talk about that all the time, how like, you know, so many people come through the doors and blame a lot of their issues. And you said earlier, like, you can blame it on everybody, but you got to take your own responsibility at a certain point. And a lot of times we do blame our parents for certain things, regardless of how amazing your childhood is. You have your own experience with it. But I think parents are what a lot of people need to realize, like, they're individuals and they have their own issues and they're coping with them with the tools that they have to the best of their ability at that time. Right. So that's amazing that you even brought into focus, like, having the humility to be like, you know, that was my journey. I did the best I could, but my daughter, obviously, she's supportive and we have a great relationship, but she had a different experience. How are you navigating having 2 grandkids? Are you seeing any, you know, parallels in them growing up in a different day and age, and kind of where like mental health comes into play as they get older?
Absolutely. So in this past school year, my grandson deals with a lot of anxiety, you know, so as he said, he went to this club, there's like 3 people that are in it, you know, and they talk about how their fears keep them from doing things. So yeah, at 9 years old in school, they're starting to address that, you know, like, I know at 16, was the first time I ever went to a therapist, you know, but I told them what I thought I wanted them to hear,
right?
You know, and there's just that different level of honesty in him, and he's just so smart. They're both so smart. My 7-year-old basically taught himself how to read.
Wow.
Yeah, and the 10-year-old is now writing books. At first they were comic books. Now we're writing history books.
Oh,
so
great.
Yesterday when I spoke to him, it was World War II that we are on right now.
Wow.
So I was like, your great-grandfather
would be really proud.
Is going to be very proud of you, and he will have that book on his coffee table.
That's amazing. Yeah, it's I mean, the fact that they're starting peer support groups for that young is unbelievable. I think that's just amazing, because that it's just going to allow people to heal at such an earlier stage, and bringing in, you know, breath work and different things, and meditation, and really teaching kids how to cope versus telling, you know, them to get over it or relax, and, you know, like we used to back in the day.
Right.
So that's awesome. And I guess let's just leave with one question. How do you maintain a sense of purpose and resilience in your ongoing journey of recovery?
So maintaining a sense of purpose, I mean, my passion is always recovery and helping the next person. But my basis really is just doing the next right thing, you know? And if I could teach anybody anything, it's like, no matter what's going on in your life, it's not somebody else's fault. You know, if I could say, don't treat the person in Wawa like that, because they have nothing to do with your day. Yes, you may be feeling uncomfortable. You may have had a bad situation at home, something, but it's not their fault. To try and not to take it out on other people. Just do the next right thing. My biggest thing is putting the cart back at the grocery store. Like, that's just the next right thing to do.
Small little things.
Small little things that add up. Yes.
Awesome. That's awesome. Are you doing groups? How can people connect with you?
So right now I work in primary mental health, early intervention support services. So we are like a crisis diversion program. So when somebody is starting to deal with their mental health problems, that's when they come to us.
Awesome.
So I'm the peer advocate there. And as I always say, I'm that extra added bonus, somebody who's been there, done that, gotten through it, and got plenty of t-shirts to prove that you can get through it.
Yeah.
So,
awesome.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Sue. Is there anything else that you want to leave with today?
No, I just can't wait till Rock the Farm. And you know what? One thing about Rock the Farm, if you would have told me that my first Rock the Farm, that I would be there, my daughter would be there, my ex-husband would be there, my partner and her ex-partner and grandchildren, like, it just brought everybody together.
That's
so
amazing.
It was like the coolest thing. Like, everybody came that day to enjoy it.
I didn't know that. That's awesome.
Yeah,
It really is such like a, I don't know, it's just a day, like, I feel like there's so much positive energy It's my favorite day of the year, so I can't wait either. And we will boogie and have a great time as we always do. This would have been the 10th year, but it did get canceled last year with the hurricane. So
and only a hurricane can stop it.
No, only a hurricane. That's the only thing that's shut us down. We tried, but June this year, come on out. And thank you so much for coming. We really appreciate it. And you're amazing. Keep it up. And I can't wait to see what you do next.
Thank you.